Our guest today is Frank Farro. Frank is the co-founder, along with his wife Natalie, of Acton Academy North Broward in Coral Springs, Florida, which they launched in 2020. Acton Academy is, of course, the popular, fast-growing global network of learner-driven microschools, now encompassing more than 280 schools worldwide. I've had the privilege of highlighting several affiliated Acton Academies on this podcast and profiling them in my Forbes column, and it's such a pleasure to have Frank on today's show to talk about his experience in launching Acton Academy North Broward. Frank Farro, thank you again for being on the Liberated podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background. A lot of the Acton affiliates that I've spoken to come to Acton Academy because of its focus on entrepreneurship and innovation, and they attract really entrepreneurial-minded individuals. And that seems to be what led you to the Acton model. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I do not have a background in education. My background is in technology and innovation leadership. So it was really kind of something that started to, the idea of going into education is something that started to percolate probably 20 years ago. I grew up in rural Florida. I'm the oldest of 6 children, and over the years, my siblings would reach out and ask for advice and input and things like that as they were kind of finding their path through life. And I realized in those conversations that a lot of the things that led me down the path of being a successful leader and innovator were not things that I learned in school. And so, in fact, many of the things that were required to be successful in the paths I was on were things I had to unlearn from traditional school. So in the area of innovation, there are no experts. You can't go to the leader at the front of the room and get the answer because you're the emerging expert as you move forward. And failure is a completely normal part of life in innovation. And in fact, it's a key ingredient. And so I had to figure those things out. And I remember thinking, man, what a missed opportunity. All my brothers and sisters are going through the public education system the same way I did. And some of the key lessons, if they weren't having these conversations with me, they would have to stumble upon their own helpers on their path. So I remember thinking, one of these days, I want to do something to make that better. But I was neck deep in my primary career. And it wasn't until 2017 when my wife and I moved to South Florida that I started getting, some interest in thinking about that as a second career. I've accomplished a lot of very interesting things in technology and innovation. And I remember thinking, I don't know what the next step is going to be, but I think it's going to be something in this direction. And so I remember having those conversations with Natalie and several of my other mentors and friends. And one day I got a text message from Natalie saying, "Hey, I just saw this video. You have to see it." And it was an 8-minute montage about Acton Academy, Maine and Austin. And it was nothing short of inspiring. It just, the switch flipped, and it was just clear this is the direction that I think we need to be heading down. So that was the beginning of kind of a long process to get to where we are now. But that was the spark that pivoted us to this whole new path.
Oh, I love it. And so what was going on at the time that led Natalie to even find that video? Were you thinking about various education options for children within your own family? Were you just curious about what was happening with education? Kind of what was the scene there?
Well, we had a daughter, and that is definitely, becoming a parent is one of the biggest context shifts that somebody can have in life. And our daughter was progressing. She was 3 at the time, and so that was another thing that was contributing to this idea of, hey, maybe it's getting time for this second career. And if we're going to do that, if we go down this path in education, what would we even do? So we had lots of conversations about, you know, I don't even know how to start a school. That's the idea for that. And we had investigated several different programs and charter affiliates, and it was a Facebook ad that got my wife's attention, and by the end of the ad she was in tears, and so it was so thoughtful and moving for her that it became something we couldn't ignore.
That's such a common experience I've heard from other Acton founders. You're nodding, it's sounding like that's also similar in the network as well, that somehow an Acton founder will find either Courage to Grow, the book that Laura Sandifer, the Acton Academy original founder, wrote, and then kind of can't stop thinking about the concepts in the book, or see videos about Acton Academy or something and can't get it out of your mind, that it becomes this hook that draws you into this vision of learner-directed, learner-driven education. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, Frank. What was it about the model, this learner-driven approach that Acton has really refined, that you found so special?
You know, it has unfolded. The beginning of it, the first hook was, holy moly, how engaged are these children, and how tuned in and authentic and vulnerable at the same time as correct, all of the positive things that you want to see in your own child is exhibited in this 8-minute video really quickly. So that was the hook. But as we started going down the path, as you mentioned, Courage to Grow, an amazing book, nice origin story for what is turning out to be an incredible step down the path of a revolution. That just kind of painted a lot more colors to the picture. And then, going through the audition process and getting accepted gave us an opportunity to get to the next layer. The next layer is when we went to owners orientation and got to participate in the studios, not a video, not a book, real life, talking to an 8-year-old and seeing what the 8-year-old is like. How has that person evolved in their 8 years, and comparing that with everything else that you see and experience throughout the whole rest of your life is just so monumental. And then in that weekend experience, I had an opportunity, while a lot of the new owners were going to the elementary studio to get more in depth, because all of them had elementary age students, everybody starting with elementary school in their elementary age in their school. I was curious. I went to the high school section, they call it Launchpad. And I signed my contract. You have to sign, here are the promises. If you're going to enter the studio as an outsider, you have to sign the promises, which I thought was interesting and thought-provoking. And I signed the contract. I sat down, and what I witnessed from 8 a.m. until I left at noon was the most well-run team that I had ever experienced, with no authority. I was the only adult in the room, no authoritative leader with a badge saying I'm in charge, but everyone kind of contributing and helping one another and keeping each other accountable in ways that were super nuanced and super effective. It was such an incredible experience that not only did it just cement the mission for me, my personal mission, my mission for my family, but also it helped me redefine what leadership could be in any context. And I had that point a nice career in corporate leadership. I considered myself to be a good leader, but I walked away with a whole new bar to go after. So
Wow.
it, every step was something you just couldn't avoid, because once you hit it, it's like, oh man, it is. This is bigger and better than I thought by orders of magnitude.
Just incredible. So what happened then, Frank, after that experience? You were clearly more committed to the model than ever before. What happened next?
You know, what happened next was we started doing the hard work of launching a brand new business. And there's no such thing as an easy launch of a brand new business. I had known that. I'd launched several businesses inside the context of enterprises. But I think a reasonable analogy for what it was actually like is a little bit like when you're pregnant with your first child. You have this beautiful vision of what you expect, and what happens is 1,000 times more amazing than what you thought. It's also 100 times more difficult than what you thought. And the growth that happens by heading down that path is perfectly analogous to what it is like, I feel like, to open an Acton Academy.
And so you got approved for an Acton Academy in 2019, which is no easy feat. There's thousands of applicants and only a small few applications are accepted to become an Acton Academy affiliate. You did have the benefit, again, of that entrepreneurial innovator background, which is so appealing to the Acton Academy network. I know I had Donna Akers on the podcast recently. She was a longtime public school teacher, had taught for nearly 30 years in public schools in Mississippi, and then launched Ivy Green Acton Academy in a rural part of the state. And she said that she felt that having that kind of public school background as a public school teacher was more of a drawback to her than a benefit, because the key is really focused on entrepreneurship. But she was able to convince them that she could shed some of her teacher conditioning to really accept and embrace this learner-driven model, and her program is so successful, and she's just phenomenal. So, but interesting that you were then able to make it into this network with your entrepreneurial background. And of course, as you're planning to launch in 2019, you're thinking, yeah, we're going to have the typical challenges with any kind of launch of any small business, as you mentioned. But then, of course, you launched in 2020 in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So a much larger challenge for any entrepreneur. How did that impact the start of your program?
Honestly, it took a little bit of pressure off of us in a sense, because we knew that the idea of our daughter Brooke going to a virtual kindergarten just was not really something that was going to work. And so it was a burn the boats kind of moment for us. And we were fortunate enough to be able to convince a handful of folks to give us the benefit of the doubt. And the fact that they were also staring at the same kind of alternatives. So I think it gave people enough courage to, let's give this new thing a try. I think that, just like with parenting, you learn in waves, and there was a lot of learning that took place in that first year. Since then, the network has grown tremendously, and the support of the network that the network is able to provide has grown substantially. And so it felt really good to have some level of agency over the educational experience that my child and our tribe were having in a time when many people felt like they had zero control over that for their children. So
that's such a good point. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was such a tumultuous time for so many families. And yet, also interestingly, it was a time I found in talking with entrepreneurs, specifically in South Florida, who've launched micro schools and these other learning programs. It was also a bit of a renaissance that there is now this cluster of education, entrepreneurship, and new micro schools that emerged from that disruption that really began to sprout in 2020. And there's so much of that collaboration and community that seems to be happening there. Why do you think that is? Why is South Florida, do you feel, a hub of some of this innovation with education?
It seems to have been a priority for the leadership in Florida to make school choice front and center. So I think that helps. But I also just, um, I also think that all parents care about their child's education. Um, Many parents trust that what is in place, it was good for them, it'll be good for their children. I think COVID gave everyone an opportunity to peek behind the curtain and see what was really going on. And when they saw what was really going on, that created more impetus, more courage to try something different. And I think that's really the key to the Renaissance. I don't know if Florida is any more or less emergent in that respect, but what I've found is across the country, once you head down the Acton path, it's a one-way trip. Like if anything were to ever happen and we had to close the school, we would be selecting where we would live based on where there would be an Acton. And that happened over the last 2 years. That's happened to our benefit. We've had people relocate from California, New Jersey, from all over the country, and specifically find where they wanted to live that was close to an Acton.
So tell us more about that learner-driven Acton model. What does it look like? How is the classroom in an Acton program so different from a conventional classroom?
I like to sum up learner-driven by saying that it eliminates the "because I said so." It doesn't even make it a possibility. There are guardrails, but those guardrails are very clear and well understood and rational. But because we strive to have no authority figure in the room, that forces the students themselves to work through levels of, I consider it leadership development. Some people focus in on the social emotional learning, which I think is a component of it. But if you're a student and you are facing off with another student who has feelings, and what's the so what behind that? At some ages, it's easier to develop that. At other ages, it's like, no, I have feelings too, and my feelings are this. And so we watch that back and forth happen all the time. And it creates this little mini crises that happen throughout the day, throughout the session, throughout the year. And that is a lot of schools have chemistry labs or STEM labs. Acton Academy Studios are a walking, talking leadership and partnership development lab. Because when those problems are not solved for you, and you experiment with different solutions to those problems and figure out what is effective, what's not effective, what's too much, well, maybe I should dial it back next time. And these are all thoughts that the learners are having every day. And the outcome of that is a level of leadership and a level of partnership that I don't think is possible when you have an authority figure that is prominent in the room. Because in fact, I know it isn't, because we have had to adjust our own approaches to how we're running the schools and how we're running the studios to minimize that, because there's so much habit and baggage that as adults we bring into the studio. So over the years, we've been able to tone that down, see the impact, tone it down more, see the impact. And, Jeff Sandifer is very direct in saying that, the biggest challenge most studios have is the adults in the room. The students will figure things out in miraculous ways if you just give them the space to do it.
So true. So when you started in that, again, that difficult 2020 year, you started with 6 students. You now have about 20 students, ages 5 through 13. What do the next few years of growth look like for Acton Academy North Broward?
At this point, we feel really strong in our foundation with respect to the guardrails and the structure, and second layer stuff like, what happens when the guide that you started the school with leaves to go on to their next great adventure, and you have to train somebody new with new personality, new perspectives. And so it's very similar with any new business, is that you got your founding group, and then there starts to be evolution, and we feel really comfortable that we've got those pieces in place. And Natalie and I were thoughtful and methodical about how we grew the school to ensure that we could work those things out in a way that still allowed us to deliver an amazing product to our families, but we were able to not have to deal with some of the challenges that come with families that are half in, half out of this kind of a model. It's a remarkably different model. It is not for everyone. We turned down, I don't know, 30, 40 families who were looking to find a way to not have to mask their child. This is not, if that is your primary objective, that is not the reason to come to an Acton. So so there's what I feel like is in our future at this point is we've got all the foundation in place, and now it's about growth. And I'll tell you, I know you've had this conversation with other Acton owners. The biggest challenge we have with growth is facility, is space. It is a very difficult terrain to find locations where it's appropriate for the use, and that we're not subject to the same expectations as an industrialized school with 1,000 students, because it isn't what we yearn to be. So we're trying to navigate that as we speak. Actually, the location that we're in now, we could double, a little bit more than double in size, and I think we're feeling really good about that. And then, but we haven't, from literally day one of the school, we haven't stopped looking for space because we just haven't found the right forever home for us.
Yes, you're right. I spoke with Tobin Slavin, who runs Acton Academy Fort Lauderdale, nearby to you, and he launched at a similar time and also had some difficulties. They thought they had found a perfect location, and then it ended up triggering a change of use ordinance, which was going to require all kinds of different hoops to jump through that were just impossible. Luckily, they're now in a beautiful education space. It was used by a church at one point, but it's education space, so it's easy to kind of bring in a new school to that location. But it does seem like some of these occupancy issues can be a big challenge for entrepreneurs everywhere, including in South Florida. Another challenge is financial access, right? These are private school models. You do rely on tuition. You mentioned that you really do want families there who understand and value the mission of learner-driven education that's encapsulated by Acton Academy. I think that's great that you're able to make sure that families are focused on that. But how do you deal with access for families who are aligned with your mission, but for whom the price tag could be quite high? Even though I will say that Acton Acton academies and micro schools more generally tend to be lower cost than traditional private schools.
Yeah, I'd say probably 30% of the people who we have offered access to, we've offered enrollment to, were unable to make it work within their finances. And they were people that were right in line with the culture, right in line with the mission, but just were not financially able. And I agree, we're definitely not anywhere close to what an average private school is around here. So we're looking forward past where we currently are. I kind of consider the model that we have a little bit like the Tesla model. Like, we're going to have, full tuition for a period of time when we have, while we get up and running. Our costs on a per student basis are not what a fully fledged 150 student Acton Academy that's been cooked and operating for 5 years looks like yet. But we're moving in that direction. And, it is access is an important thing for Natalie and I. And that's at the forefront of our focus right now.
Mm. So you mentioned that you think Acton Academy is really a learning revolution, an education revolution. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about why you think that is, and do you sense this momentum toward learner-driven education?
It's the reason I say that is because it is a Gestalt perspective in how you look at a child. If you look at a child as an empty vessel to be filled with facts, then this is not the model for you. And I think many people think about that when they think of children, because that is, I think, a common perspective. And then you have your own. And if you're one of the parents that is a parent on purpose and loves the miracle that is sitting in front of them at the dinner table, and you connect with your child to a degree where they're not an empty vessel, that they're something incredibly special, it makes it difficult to accept as a reality that they are just empty. You have to fill them up in order for them to be successful, because you watch them be successful on a daily basis. And when that happens, then the only barrier for a model like Acton is, do you know it exists? Because many people don't. So I think that when you have a family who has that experience with their own children, and then recognize that there's an alternative, it's, like I said, one-way trip. And I'm not even necessarily saying Acton is the only approach. There are a lot of that realization within your own family sensitizes you to the idea there must be a better way, and that puts people down a path, and there's lots of different interesting options for them.
Right. Yeah. All of these kind of alternatives to a conventional classroom. And then families, thankfully now, thanks to entrepreneurs like you, are able to find just the right learning environment for their child. And hopefully that process continues so that there's an increasing amount of these options for families all across the country. And so, as we begin to wrap up, Frank, your background is in entrepreneurship and innovation. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs, people who might be listening or watching, thinking about starting a micro school or launching some kind of non-traditional educational program? What advice do you have for them, both as, again, a longtime entrepreneur and now with this new venture in starting Acton Academy North Broward?
What I So we talked about the facility challenges. I feel like that's definitely a theme that is difficult. There's several barriers, as any entrepreneur you've got to get over. The biggest one, though, is when you have the tough days, when you have, because you're so invested. The upside of this endeavor is it means so much. The impact is so high. The meaning is so positive. The downside is that when you feel like you made a mistake, all of those things crush down on you like, wow. And so early on in our school, I had to baseline on what is really a bad day when you're starting a school like this. And I couldn't find, even in the worst day that we had, in the toughest day with the biggest chaos going on, or this parent behaving in a particular way, I couldn't find a single moment where I felt like these students would be better off if they were at a regular school. Not a single moment. And I'm 3 years in and feeling really confident in that. And the distance between what we offer and the impact and outcomes we have, not just for the student, but for the families involved, it's lengthening the distance. So you have to, whatever that is for any entrepreneur when you're starting out your new endeavor, needs to be something that can provide you with context for the challenges, so that the challenges continue to be challenges and not just soul crushing reasons to abort mission.
Right. So seeing that opportunity or that gap between what the conventional classroom's offering and what a new entrepreneur is trying to build, there can be those bad days, there can be those setbacks, but still working toward creating something much better. And I think that that's interesting, that even on some of your worst days, you still felt that what you were offering to these learners, or heroes as they're known in Acton, was something better than that they would be getting in a traditional classroom. So that's great. So, Frank, if my listeners and viewers want to connect with you and find out more about your work with Acton Academy North Broward, what is the best way for them to do that?
Best way for us is to go to our website. Our website is Acton Academy NB for North Broward.com. It's got a good amount of information to get people started to investigate if this is even a model that is interesting to them. And from there, it's fairly easy to book a conversation with us if you want to understand more. So we're a small school, a lot of work going on, a lot of balls in the air, and that's the best approach to ensure that that families who are curious get the time that they need.
Frank Farro, thanks for being on the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. Been a pleasure.